Dad, are you my father? The old man found this question so funny that he giggled, shaking his whole body. This caused a coughing fit, and when he cleared his throat and wiped his lips with a handkerchief, he turned and looked straight into his daughter's face with happy eyes. Don't you think it's a little late to think about such a problem? Yes, Dad, but better late than never. How did you even have such a question? What caused your doubts? It's a pretty long story, Dad. 2 days before she died, Mom called me to her bed and asked me to look after you. He'll be helpless without you, she said. Then she closed her eyes. She found it difficult to speak. She opened her eyes anyway, looked at me intently and said, "If it weren't for his generosity, Pritu, you wouldn't be alive today." To be honest, I didn't quite understand what she meant. I wanted to clarify what it is about. But while I was formulating my question, she closed her eyes again. This time, by the way she was breathing evenly, I realized that she had fallen asleep. That was the day she fell into a coma, and the next day she died. It's been 4 years since then, and I keep thinking about it. Prita turned to her father. You know, she didn't say, you owe your existence to him. Undoubtedly, this would be stupid, but it can be understood. Mom was on the verge of a coma, but she said, if it wasn't for his generosity, you wouldn't be alive. And she said it very seriously. It wasn't a platitude. The word generosity had an absolutely real meaning. That's what made me ask this question. No, Pritu, the old man smiled. You haven't told me everything. What your mother said was undoubtedly very intriguing. But for a daughter who doubts her paternity because of one statement, Prithu, this is too little. You have to tell me more. She hesitated, but suddenly decided to clear her heart of everything that she had been hiding for a long time. Well, Dad, you and Mom were good friends, but you weren't lovers. The old man laughed. First you ask me if I am your father. Then follows an equally profound conclusion. Prithu, my girl, what do you mean when you say that your mother and I were just friends and not lovers? I would like an explanation. Prithu was ready for such a question. Dad, a man and a woman, even a husband and wife can be lovers, but not friends. Conversely, they can be friends, but not lovers. Agree? Wait, honey. First, define what do you mean by lovers in this context? By lovers, I mean that, a complex in the relationship between a man and a woman, which is based on making love. In short, are you convinced that my mother and I did not have a relationship? Yes, Dad, since I found out about such things. Well, you know, from friends and from the movies, I realized that you have a strange relationship. How can children know that their parents are entering or not entering into a relationship? Maybe I really don't know, but this cannot fully explain my interest. Understand. Maybe it's some kind of sixth sense. So, this question has been boiling inside you for 4 years? Well, didn't boil. It's just to satisfy my curiosity. Whatever the answer is, it doesn't matter to you and me. And you waited and waited, and when it turned out that the answer could go away forever with me, did you decide? No, Dad. The doctors don't think you're in danger. Well, you asked a question, and I have to answer it. And I will answer. The conversation took place on the balcony of the fourth floor of a large apartment building in a chic residential area of Chennai. It was a luxurious apartment. The balcony was a deeply recessed, spacious niche that stretched throughout the house and was furnished as a living room. Part of it turned into a covered balcony. There were a lot of army stuff in the room, and there was a quiet dignity in the old man's whole appearance. The gleam of unyielding authority in his eyes clearly betrayed the retired colonel. Even when he was sitting relaxed on a wicker chair, he kept his back straight, as if on parade. His feet, standing on the carpet, were covered with a blanket, because it was a cold December evening and a chilly wind was blowing through the hall. On a small stool next to him lay an inhaler and several bottles of medicines, and on a table against the wall there were bottles of medicines, a large thermos, and a glass. There was a full oxygen tank next to the table. The veteran clearly suffered from a respiratory illness. A woman in her mid-30s was sitting next to him on an upholstered chair. She was somewhat plump, with a beautiful, cheerful face. The doctor asked you to talk as little as possible, his daughter reminded him. The old man laughed. In that case, you shouldn't have asked your question. Please let me cancel this question then, the woman said, laughing, adjusting the pillow on which the soldier's hand rested. That's impossible, Pridu. I have to tell you everything, otherwise I won't be able to sleep tonight. And I don't have any breathing problems. Asthma only bothers me at night. Anyway, it's time for a warm soup, Prita said. I'll get you a mug of broth. You can tell your story while you drink. She left and soon returned with a tray on which stood a large steaming mug, the design of which must have been in fashion when the old man was still a second lieutenant. He liked the hot stuff. He held the mug with a hand towel, blew on it, and took a careful sip. The soup is amazing, he announced. After a while, the father began his confession. This is a secret, said the colonel, that Mithu and I have not shared with anyone. We can't let him die with us. You have the right to know everything. This is the story. The events I am alluding to occurred when I was serving at the headquarters in Delhi. I had a communication system under my command: telephone, telegraph, secret lines. Social life in such garrisons consisted of regular visits, club meetings, dinners, and dances. This is a pattern set by the British, and we liked it. We continued to adhere to it even after the British left. Why look for something better and give up the good? Of course, there have been changes, but the most important thing remains. Our former colonial officers, in order to convince us of their superiority and thereby assert their right to govern us, developed standards of behavior that they themselves strictly adhered to. Their colleagues from the native military were accepted into the secular circle only if they followed these codes. After gaining independence, we left the tradition unchanged. And it was this voluntary internal control that made it possible to protect our army from corruption, which the association of politicians and bureaucrats extended to bureaucracy and the police. We were proud to belong to one of the best armies in the world, and we only cared that the new officer we introduced into the club could behave in a Western manner at the table. What does all this have to do with the question I asked? Prida asked, who knew that once her father brought up the subject of the greatness of his army, he would not be easily stopped. This has a direct bearing on my story. The crisis in our lives might have been resolved differently if we had been civilians. May I continue my story? I'm sorry for interrupting. Please continue. So that's it. Mithu and I were popular members of the club. I have always been someone in the management, for example, the protocol secretary, and he was always in charge of entertainment, billiards, booze, or something else like that. I was known for bringing the club to the state we called home. Your mother was a great dancer. Those who were interested in dancing always wanted your mother as a partner. God, how she danced. It's a pity you didn't see her dancing. That's your problem. All the more or less experienced dancers of the club lined up for the honor of waltzing with her. It was all great fun. Mom always changed the subject if I asked her about her dancing. Ouch. Sorry, Dad. I'm interrupting again. Yes, she stopped dancing after she conceived you. I'll get to that now. 2 years after our marriage, your grandmother broke her femur. Your Aunt Jaswinder, who was in Bangalore at the time, took care of her. Now doctors regularly insert pins and screws to fix bones, and 35 years ago this was impossible. But there is a new doctor in Bangalore, an Englishman. He inserted a piece of iron into her thigh bone and told her that she would be home in a week and would be able to walk without a crutch. And, allegedly, the grandmother needs support for only a month. But something went wrong. She developed complications that prevented her from being discharged from the hospital. Your aunt is a naval officer. You know that. And she had to go on board. The hike was scheduled for 3 months, and Mithu agreed to go to Bangalore to look after her mother. Mithu had many friends in this town, where she spent many years with her family before her marriage. She had a lot to tell about life in Bangalore, where, as a guest of her uncle, the colonel, she became a popular member of the army unit. I was sent on a business trip to the northern states and counties, and we couldn't meet your mom for 3 months. Your aunt returned from the exercises in due time, and Mithu went home. I expected her to boil with excitement when she got off the train. But no, she was not at all what I had hoped for. I do not know how to describe her condition better. Sadness? It was just a shade of sadness. She was more upset than sad. You know, suffering was the closest thing to describing her. Anguish showed on her face. Are you worried about your mom? I asked. No, Mom's fine. Are you unwell? Yes, I'm not well. Have you got the flu? Maybe, she replied. Of course, I was disappointed. I didn't expect such a bitter reunion. Mithu was silent in the car, and as soon as we got home, she disappeared into the bathroom. It was too late to go to my office. I got dressed and went to the dining table. Mithu was still in the bathroom. The cook served me breakfast, and when I started, Mithu joined me, took a bite of bread, and drank some water. It was weird. You see, when your mother had fever attacks, she was always annoyed, quarreling and quarreling. But this time she was distant and quiet, as if she didn't want my sympathy. Why don't you drink coffee? I asked. I feel sick, she replied. I decided to give her time to recover and return to her previous state. When I took my hat and was about to leave, Mithu spoke. Damu, I have to tell you something. I stopped and turned to her. I'm pregnant, she said. She paused, but not enough for me to react. I don't think you're the father, she continued. More precisely, I'm sure you're not the father. I stood dumbfounded. Our eyes met, but it was only for a split second. She turned away. Tears flowed freely. Damu, I'm unhappy. I'm a jerk. It wasn't a heartfelt affection. It's just a moment of madness. I want to die. She leaned forward and rested her forehead on her crossed arms. I didn't say anything, just looked at her tears and left. Fortunately, the driver was standing at the porch. I don't remember how I handled work that day. She didn't call Mithu, and neither did I. I usually come home for lunch. I missed lunch that day. It was about 3 o'clock. I'm hungry. At the local canteen, I took a sandwich and coffee. When I was having lunch, I suddenly realized that I had to go home as soon as possible. It is necessary to solve the problem right now. An epiphany happened. When I got home, your mother was standing at the front door. She was dressed for the trip. 2 suitcases were on the landing in front of the front door. Mithu decided to leave. I asked, "Where are you going?" "To Merit. The college position I left when I got married is vacant again, and the principal said I could go back there." I accepted his offer, but I'm not going there right now. I'm going to Missouri, where my classmate works as a gynecologist. I'm going to have an abortion. She spoke in a determined tone. Great. When's your train? At 6. I went and changed my clothes. The Indian Army trains its officers to think and act in a crisis. I used my training to good effect. The idea of breaking up with Mithu forever did not appeal to me. I'm sure she thought so too. We've only known each other for 2 years, but we've had so much fun in those 2 years. Mithu decided to do what she thought was decent and right. I had to say something. The ball was on my court. When I returned to the living room, Mithu was sitting in the corner of the sofa with a dejected look. "Mithu," I ordered, "cancel your ticket. Let's take our time. We'll think about it for a couple of days, and then we can decide what to do and how to do it." I took both suitcases and carried them to the bedroom. Mithu did not object by word or gesture. I usually go to bed very early while Mithu is watching TV. TV was an innovation for Delhi at that time. She always went to bed after the TV show. I usually read until she joined me, but I wasn't in the mood to read today. I just fell asleep. When I woke up that night, I didn't find Mitha by my side. I found her in the guest room. The next day, we started our duties as if nothing had happened. Mitha must have cried last night. Her eyes were red and swollen. We talked to each other, of course, but no more than 2 people living in the same house need. Mithu spent the second night in the guest room again. On the 3rd morning, Mithu must have gotten up early, because when I returned from my morning run, she was waiting for me fully dressed in the living room. The 2-day waiting period has come to an end. "We have to make a decision," she said. I asked, "Do you want to leave so badly?" She slowly shook her head negatively, and again tears flowed from her eyes, and again she made no effort to wipe them away. "Well, then you don't have to leave," I said. "But I have to go to Missouri," she said. "Do you want to kill a baby?" "I don't know. Think for a moment and answer yes or no." "No," she said, "but I have to." "No, you don't have to if you don't want to. And I don't want to be involved in a murder one way or another." Even now, it surprises me that we have come to a decision on such an important issue with just these few words. We never brought it up again. Mithu stayed, and the pregnancy continued. The next 9 months were pure torture. The tormentors were our friends and neighbors on campus. A flood of visitors poured into our house as soon as the general's wife found out about your mother's pregnancy and broadcast it on the garrison radio. They all congratulated me briefly, and then walked past me to hug and kiss Mitha and fill her up with sour and salty food. All these congratulations were heavily reflected in my mind. Congratulating a husband on his wife's infidelity is the height of bullying. But I endured this hell. The next time we went to the club, the secretary in charge of women's affairs publicly announced that according to the rules of the club, Mithu should not dance. As a joke, of course, because there was no such rule. But your mom never danced again. Never. Something about her transgression, her pop, had to do with dancing. Mithu has not received any of the support that wives expect from their husbands when they are in an interesting position. Mithu has never invited me to feel your blows on her stomach or listen to your heartbeat. The traditional ceremony at the end of the 9th month, when the birth is about to begin, was conducted by me, like a real father. Your mother's forearms were loaded with glass bracelets, and the booty ritual was great. Then there was the expectation of the onset of pain. When I came to the cradle and saw you for the first time, I immediately fell in love with you. Believe it or not, my heart almost stopped. You were so beautiful. You're still a beauty. Mestizos in general are always beautiful, and you in particular. Dad, well, you've made me blush. What can I do if it's true? I then asked the nurse, can I take it? The nurse considered the request for a moment. You can, she said and added sternly, but no kissing. A student nurse carried you and handed you over to me. She stood next to you and supported your head. You, the old man gasped with the delight of the memories. You opened one eye and twisted your mouth. It looked so much like a mischievous wink that all three of us laughed. I went back to your mom. I must have had the biggest smile I could muster. When I told her that you were the cutest kid I'd ever seen, she gave me her trademark smile for the first time in months. You've made this house happy again. No father has ever been so madly in love with his child as I am with you. It made your mom very happy too. But our relationship was only through you. The only thing that united us was what was connected to you. I had no attraction to Mikt, and she did not seek physical intimacy. We never talked about it. Yes, you're right, sweetheart. We were friends, but not lovers. I am sure that the average Indian should consider it strange, even incredible, how we overcame the crisis. The average Indian cannot understand this, but for an Indian Army officer, such behavior towards women was second nature. The military background from my grandfather's time told me that the child she was carrying was not mine, and Mithu behaved in accordance with this tradition. She could easily have had an abortion and not tell me anything, but I acted honorably, and I did what Officer Pucka should do, but, to our mutual regret, not completely. I accepted her child as my own, but I did not accept her back as my wife. Yes, as a friend. Yes, like your mother, but not as the love of my life. And she acted according to the rules of Dharma Patini, because she accepted her fate without a single murmur. Outwardly, we were a couple made for each other, and no parent in the garrison loved their child more than your mother and I did. But our love for you didn't extend to her and me, to give you brothers and sisters to play with. That's all, Prithu. Prithu, who held her father's hand most of the time, was surprised by the sudden ending of the story. So that's it, Dad? Such a sudden end? I'm an old Prithu soldier, not a storyteller. I don't have the skills to end a story the way it's expected. When I had said everything I was going to say, I stopped. And I'm sure you've carefully analyzed the situation and come to some conclusions. He was silent for a while. The daughter also waited in silence. She knew he had more to say, and he spoke slowly. I feel that Kipling was absolutely right when he said that the East is the East, and the West is the West, and they will never meet. When Mithu told me she was doing some things in a Western way, and when I accepted her and you, I did the same in a Western way. But all that happened after that was the East. But pouring love on someone else's child is not Oriental. You're wrong about that, Prithu. An ancient Tamil proverb says that a man loves his lover's child, born before he knew her, more than he loves his own. Prithu looked at her father questioningly. That's just it. Do you think Mom was faithful to you? Daughter, you should know better. She was with you all the time. And when you went to school, or wherever, Mithu was doing household chores. I cooked, washed, tidied up, and made myself comfortable. The one that, I think so. She has always remained the faithful wife of an officer. At least after you were born. Prita was a little embarrassed. And you? You know, your Aunt Jaswinder retired from the Navy 2 years after you were born. Remember, she was always with us. She followed our family through all the garrisons and remote corners in the jungles of India. Prita's breath caught in his throat. That's her. Yes, Prithu, yes. Her son, Syria, is your brother. You've always treated him like your son. How could I not have guessed before? They sat in silence for a while. Then Prita stood up. Well, that's it, we talked. Now you need to take your medicine and get ready for bed. Thanks, Dad. The father ruffled her hair, and the daughter kissed him on the forehead.